Hello and welcome to Critical Myth Theory. My name's Joel.
My name's Alexander. Let's get into it.
Alright, so this is the conclusion of our season, although that's almost too lofty of a term for it. I mean, This is 6 episodes, but this was our introduction, sort of our introduction to what we're talking about, and we kind of want to start talking about the specifics more, some of the philosophy, and make this a little bit more research-based as well. So
I guess for this episode, what we're going to be doing is kind of going over definitions of. What I meant to say was we're going to be going over what we talked about, which includes the definition of mythology, which is kind of where I stumbled there. And then we're also going to talk about all the different topics that we had touched on in the past 5 episodes.
Just briefly.
Just to kind of give you an idea of what we did again and how that is going to kind of guide us for our Season 2 discussion.
Sort of to put that golden thread between Episode 1 and 6 and be like, here's where we were, here's where we are, here's where we're going to go.
Right, exactly. And then after that, we're going to kind of discuss some ideas of what Season 2 might look like.
Yep.
And, of course, we aren't able to look into the future, but I think we get a pretty good grasp of what we want Season 2 to look like, so...
Oh, yeah. Well, we'll try to keep this one short, just because this is not so much a content episode.
That's true.
It's more as a transition episode.
Yeah, exactly. So, do you remember what we talked about in the first episode? It was quite some time ago.
Yeah, well, I was listening to the first episode. It's actually... that was a bit of a brutal experience, I'm not going to lie, but... I really hope that we continue to improve. But we talked about the definition of mythology, at least how we're defining it.
Yeah.
And we defined it as myths. Myths are supernatural stories that reflect our culture and their values. I would just quickly amend that and say that myths are supernatural stories that reflect cultures in general and their beliefs and values.
Sure.
And I think that would be the connector between, ancient history myths, Roman, Greece, Mesopotamia, Egypt, but also to our day, so that sort of that link.
Right.
But I also think that will open us up to talking about things that aren't necessarily just American or Canadian. Western in general, because we're noticing a lot of global influence too. We were briefly talking about Japan earlier, probably about an hour earlier, maybe 2, and Japan's influence in video game and anime culture as well.
Yeah. Now, I don't know if we're going to be talking about anime or not. I have briefly dipped my toes in shonen anime, personally.
My exposure is Avatar and Pokemon.
And it's funny, though, because Avatar is actually just influenced by anime, but it is, in fact, an American product, which is very kind of an interesting, because it's back and forth there. And, of course, Pokemon is, it's kind of the big thing in Japan, and kind of really made its way over to America in a big way. So these are things that we can now talk about based on the broadening of the definition, I think, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we kind of talked about, why supernatural stories, so we kind of figured that, we came to the conclusion that, supernatural stories are basically broader stories that we can kind of talk about, right? They broaden the lens for what we can talk about and make it easier to apply to our individual life.
And they're also, they kind of show the morals in capital letters. I mean, there's people with now big superpowers, perhaps, and you see how what they do in a grand cosmological battle, or even just a big saving the city type of story. You see what those types of qualities do on a large scale, and so you're able to scale that back to yourself. And it's more obvious, and it's also, because it's on a big scale, it's also pretty compelling. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And some of the things we talked about too were, good and evil and how the characters kind of play into that story. That theme was very persistent, especially because we talked about fantasy in particular, which is a very good and evil kind of genre. And so we saw that theme kind of pop up in all the stories that we talked about. So we talked about, Lord of the Rings, Narnia. We talked about Star Wars and Harry Potter. Not in that order. I've messed up the order at the end there. But anyways, and yeah, we talked about like the legacy, kind of how we have Christian mythology is kind of the influence behind Lord of the Rings and Narnia, which has become the influence of a lot of our current mythology as well. And then episode 4, we talked about Harry Potter. That's where we kind of got to the idea of the chosen one. And then we talked about kind of the comparison between Anakin and Harry Potter, which kind of led us to the latest episode before this one, which was talking about Star Wars.
It's probably the most fun I've had in an episode. I had so much fun with that episode. I don't know about you, but sort of the first 30 minutes talking about the content, and the last 30 minutes kind of ad-libbing and just talking about sort of our personal reflections on some of the newer stuff.
I think that goes to show that there's a lot to be talked about in Star Wars, and I feel like we haven't seen the last of the discussion of Star Wars.
We probably haven't seen the last of a lot of the things we've talked about so far.
Not.
We've used these as general topics in order to show basically what are the foundations of current, contemporary mythology. And I guess the last thing we talked about in Star Wars in particular was the good and the light, and the evil and the dark, and sort of that slow separation between the good and the light and the evil and the dark. So now the dark side is becoming almost necessary for balance of the Force, rather than balance of the Force meaning light eradicating dark. Being code words for good and evil.
Yeah, we're starting to see the shift from the purity of the light to the yin and the yang. I think is kind of the way that I would put it, right? Where that dark in the light is a good representation of what is good, whereas opposed to the purity.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
Anyways, as we kind of go over this as well, I think we're good time to kind of reflect on. You were saying you listened to the very first episode again, and you were not super impressed with the quality of our conversation.
Well, it was also more for. We have our personal goals with this podcast. I mean, we didn't start it for no reason. We kind of have our primary and secondary goals. For me, it was. I tend to talk pretty scattered, and I'm certainly not the best at bringing across ideas. But I know what I want to say, and so I wanted to learn how to speak, think, and even write more effectively and more clearly. And this has been a bit of a project in that. And secondarily, which is, Alex's first thing that he wanted to do with this podcast, well, he can speak for himself.
Yeah. I mean, part of what I wanted there was to make a community, to kind of reach out to more people and to see if there's people out there who are wanting to hear this sort of thing and wanting to connect through it.
Mm-hmm. And that'd be, those two motivations. They've really driven us to do what we wanted to do. We actually both kind of came up to each other and just coincidentally were going to ask on the same day, "Hey, do you want to start a podcast?" Because I had it sitting in my mind for a bit, and we kind of had to agree more or less on what the topic was going to be about.
Yeah.
I think for me it was more philosophy focused. I think for you it was more sort of fantasy and board game focused, was it?
The board games kind of, again, because my idea was to build a community, so board games was one of them. Kind of like a good branch to kind of reach out into the greater realm of geek culture, right? I feel like a lot of times that's kind of the entry level, right? You start playing a board game and you start getting into the more obscure board games, and then eventually you find yourself maybe playing a role-playing game or playing Magic the Gathering, which is again that the beginning of the delve into the deep fantasy. Yeah. And so for me it was kind of leading up to that, I knew it was going to be baby steps. So that was my idea. That being said, we've definitely taken a different route here, and I'm certainly not upset with that different route. So, and looking forward to season 2, which I guess is probably a good idea to kind of just jump right into.
Yeah. So,
that.
talking about what we plan to do for season 2, I mean, that original idea of maybe talking a little bit of Dungeons and Dragons and whatnot, that's still not left the back of our minds, but then again, it's still at the back of our minds. We've got probably bigger cultural things to talk about.
Yeah. So I think because season 1 was so very introductory, we definitely wanted to have more structure in it, because we weren't looking to pick apart things that are current. Because of the time we were just, we're introducing ourselves into this topic so that you understand why we're talking about these things through the lens that we're talking about. Whereas now we're actually going to be zooming in on these specific things, which is going to be relevant for current culture. It's going to be relevant for what's coming out new and exciting things. One of the things that I wanted to do was introduce a segment kind of at the beginning of the episode. Instead of just saying, let's get into it, we're actually going to have, a bit of a moment to catch up with each other and maybe even see what's going on in the current mythology culture, right? Like, for example, we have new things happening out in our world now that, the world's kind of opening back up again to movie releases and whatnot. We are definitely going to be on the ball, hopefully, with those sorts of things, right? Right, we missed kind of Black Widow opening, and now we're going to be looking at Suicide Squad coming out this week. We've got The Green Knight, which is a movie that came out very recently that definitely touches on Arthurian legend. I think it can definitely be a topic that we could talk about. And so just reflecting on these different new and exciting things while they're present is a good idea. And so having less rigid of a structure than we had in season 1, just because those things will kind of jump out at us, I think.
Yeah. And we're also hoping to improve the overall quality of our podcast too, as we're getting more into this. One thing is that I don't have a very good microphone, so Alex keeps bringing his, and I should probably get a better one as well. So I'll probably do that over this break that we might be taking. We're probably going to be taking a week off, so there's going to be a week that we don't have a podcast episode released. Yeah. Just to kind of revamp what we have and reset, I guess.
Yeah. Look for the season 2 premiere in 2 weeks.
Yeah. When would that be?
We have a few things coming up on the weekend, so we're probably going to be recording, but still before Wednesday.
Yeah. Our August is a little bit busy. Yeah. But we'll definitely make it work. It being the last month of summer. Yeah. But that's another thing. I mean, we both go to school, and we're both in university, and we do that full time. It's difficult to do this as we can't do this thing as a full time gig. This is something that we're going to be investing a fair bit of time into, but then again, we can't focus 40 hours a week on. And so there might be times where we are postponing episodes due to midterms or exams.
Or holidays. We got Christmas coming up at the end of the year.
That's right.
That being said, we probably should do a Christmas episode, but that's
well, and we'll see if we can pre-record things too.
Yeah.
But these are going to get more research heavy as well, because they're going to be more specific. So we're going to start taking apart things, not so much as, yes, analyses, but we're also going to take the step further and talk about its place in the cultural story. Mm-hmm. And in general, I guess depending on our language, I might say archetypes, and just talk about some of the moral bases that we started from the beginning, and see how they apply.
Yeah.
Definitely going to be a bit heavier on philosophy.
And because we're taking such a bit more of a specific approach, don't expect broad themes or broad things. If we're going to talk about, let's say, superheroes, we're not going to just talk about superheroes in general, right? First season we would have done that sort of thing where we talk about Star Wars in general. Whereas now it's going to be more specific. We do have a few things in the works. So, like, for example, I know Joel's been going on about this Loki TV show.
I cannot shut up about it until I've got it out of my system, and then I'm going to feel free, finally, to think of something else and not fixate on it.
Yeah. No, exactly. So I think like having that understanding that we're going to be kind of dissecting specific things without necessarily covering the broad topic. We can maybe touch on the broad topic briefly at the beginning, but that's not really going to be the meat and potatoes of what we're going to be talking about going forward, right? Because there's a lot. If we wanted to go broad topics, we could talk, we could have another season of just more broad topics, whether it be superheroes, whether it be Marvel in particular, whether it be Star Trek, whether it be Doctor Who, right? There's so many things that we can talk about, but I think instead what we're going to be doing is pulling individual things from those bigger topics. Hopefully, that's the plan anyways. Mm-hmm. And yeah, like he said, we're going to be talking a bit more of a philosophical lens as well, which I think is going to be very important going forward with what we're looking at.
Yeah, and we might see if we can get some intro music somehow. I don't know a lot of the copyright stuff, so just reading into that. Perhaps getting a Facebook media presence, so not just having it on, not just posting the episodes on YouTube and Spotify and seeing if people come along. But we already have Discord, but having a Facebook presence would be great as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it hasn't really been prolific yet at this point.
No.
I think like with an increase of quality, hopefully that'll also change. I think we're going to start to see a bit of an increase in that. So
if
more community. Yeah,
if I'm being quite honest, I haven't been eager to share it so quickly, just because I don't know about you, but these first few episodes is sort of a bit insecure about the quality as well. And I do want to feel like we're improving, and that we're at a point where we can start being like, okay, I think that people in general actually might start loving this stuff. We might actually be feeling something here.
Yeah, exactly. We don't want to just be throwing the stuff out there and hoping it sticks. We do want to actually eventually get a plan out there. But it is a bit scary, kind of bearing your soul and hoping to see results and only getting back negative feedback, or no feedback at all, right? So that being said, we're certainly going to see a bit of a push in that direction of just reaching out to more people, having more community. So, and if you're listening to this episode in the future because you've heard of heard of us through some other method, then tell you what, it worked.
Yeah.
Here we are.
Yeah, that'd be pretty cool.
It was me telling you from the past that our future plan worked.
Yeah, this... oh, man. I didn't even think of that. This could be... I'm thinking of it pretty presently. So.
Yeah. And I think it's a good idea to kind of keep that approach. But honestly, we're doing a podcast, and this, how the internet works, once it's out there forever. So... but yeah, no, there's a lot of things. And I think at this point in time, we can maybe touch on some of the topics that we're going to talk about in Season 2. We didn't specifically talk about Loki.
Yeah.
We're not going to come out with a schedule like we did with the first season, because with the second season, again, we wanted to have a bit more, interactive with what's going on today. So let's say we wanted to plan 2 weeks, and we say we're going to do Loki in 2 weeks, but something else comes up in between now and then that we weren't anticipating. We'd rather almost talk about something that's current and fresh than stick in the schedule of something that far in advance. So hopefully you guys are still excited to see the new content coming out, while at the same time we can't necessarily always give an idea of what's going to happen the next week.
What is nice, and also perhaps not so nice, it depends how you look at it, we have a lot of cultural content to catch up with over decades of material.
Even this past couple of years have been kind of crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. Even if we're just looking at the past decade, the evolution of the Avengers movies, for example, Fox being eaten up by Disney as well, and there's a lot of stuff to talk about. The moving from big theater to streaming, for example.
Yeah.
That's another thing to talk about, and how we're looking more at TV shows rather than big movies.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much to talk about. in the past couple of years. Like I said, that's why we want to make sure that we're staying current and on the cusp of what's going on. But I mean, think some of the themes. I mean, I think Joel's head will explode if we don't talk about Loki. So we kind of know that's coming up. A few other things we were looking to talk about were certain things like, for example, Doctor Who. There's a lot of content in Doctor Who and Star Trek in particular as well when it comes to philosophy and I think even just current culture that we can probably dissect some individual episodes, let's say, of each of these things. So there's quite a bit of that. Again, I don't want to get too much specifics because if we get too much, then we're going to have to commit to it. Yeah. Which is not a bad thing, but like, again, we want to have enough room for anything that we need to talk about.
I figure my brother would be pretty upset if we didn't talk about Avatar: The Last Airbender.
At some point, it's going to come up.
At some point.
All right, it's going to come up. Yeah, it's going to come up. And I think that's something we're going to look forward to as well. One of the things I was running by Joel, and we may see this come up during season 2 as well, was just the idea of maybe a personal episode as well, where it's just Joel or just me, right? We come out with a topic that we know very well. The other person maybe doesn't know anything about it at all. Mm-hmm. And just having an episode where, you know, we get to let the other person take a week off, and we just do an individual episode. And we'll see the feedback for that, of course, as well. I mean, if we find that there are no people listening to that episode, then we might just scrap that idea. But expect season 2 to be a bit more experimental overall.
Absolutely.
And I like that idea. Yeah, I think that's what we're going to see. So
it's testing grounds that I'm really excited for. And yeah, I know that some of us have more particular expertise, especially you in the fantasy genre. The amount of stuff you know, it's... I mean, he's been pulling me into Dungeons and Dragons and whatnot, and he's trying to get me into Magic the Gathering as well. And he got me into the Dresden Files, and I was like, fine, just to stop you talking about it, I'll read the first book, and now I'm stuck in a 17-book series with more to come. So,
yeah,
you know.
Yeah, looking forward to having him catch up with that because it's another one suffering the same fate as me is waiting.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And then you can bet that we're going to be talking about it, and I know Alex has got years of information just at the tip of his tongue that he's trying not to spoil for me. So it's actually kind of nice that we're getting some of these topics out right now. So the Dresden Files, I will warn you, is a little bit more adult at times, but that would be a series to start if you're looking for episodes far down the road.
Yeah, and I think at the same time we want to make this, if we're talking about like vague topics, like not vague, less heard of things, we're going to try to focus on making it more accessible. We're going to have to find the fine line between quality content and spoiler free, perhaps, or not. We still have to figure that out, right? If it's if it's something like Star Wars, obviously everyone I know has watched Star Wars, or at least a lot of people I know have watched Star Wars, but maybe not everyone's watched. I don't know, Alien. That's a movie series that I want to get into, maybe for a personal episode. And I can't expect everyone to have watched it, but again, trying to walk that fine line between, we're actually talking about something that means something without giving too much away. And something like the Dresden Files is a good example of that because as much as I suggest the series, it is 17 books. It is quite a commitment. And I know it's not nearly as known as, let's say, Lord of the Rings or even more contemporary fantasy series such as The Wheel of Time. But, yeah, still, that's like near and dear to my heart, so we're definitely going to have to talk about it at some point.
Yeah. We won't be able to avoid it.
That's true. But yeah, I think at this point in time, we're pretty much good to wrap up. So thank you guys for joining us for the first season. It's been a blast.
Well, and it's been a struggle too.
Yeah.
It's I mean, it might not look like a lot, but it's kind of tough trying to get ourselves into this new routine and to improve ourselves, and it's been a lot of fun. It's been so rewarding, and I hope it continues to be just that as well. And I hope that the second season we have the same thing as well.
Yeah, for sure. And until then, I guess if you guys have any comments, any things you want to suggest for maybe more experimental things to do in season 2, we're always open for that sort of thing. Feel free to drop in the comments of just small suggestions. We'd love to hear them, or big suggestions. I'm not opposed to that, but but yeah. Otherwise, I think we're good to sign off. So
yeah, and we might be able to debut as a tentative date, debut the season 2 episode 1 on the 19th.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the plan at this point. So yeah, expect to hear us back again on the 19th.
All right. Cheers, guys.
See ya.